Everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and we are now on to the next stage in our sew along, where we are making Clara the cat, which is this kit just here, and we are going to make the bonnet today. So the kit is part of the Apple Blossom Woodland collection by Lilly Rose Dolls, and I want to say a huge thank you to Claire and Richard who have sponsored the videos for Clara and for her outfits by allowing me to have a kit so that I could bring these videos to you. And we've got Clara partly dressed at the moment. She's got her bloomers on there that we made in the last video, and so before we can get her ears properly tied on, I'm ready for those to be sewn on properly. They're just pinned on at the moment because I want to just put those on when we've got her hat, her bonnet in order. So we're going to get on and make her bonnet today, and then we'll be able to finish off the rest of her outfit. And I'm starting off with the bloomers and the bonnet so that when we've done her dress and a pinafore, she's then completely done and ready to go. So I will pop the camera down. I just wanted to say, if you are enjoying these sew along videos, then please consider subscribing to my channel. But also, if you do enjoy the content, I know we're right at the very beginning now, but if you've liked my videos in the past, hopefully you'll like this one too, and could just click on the like button, the thumbs up. That would really help my channel as well, and I'd appreciate that from you. And leave me a comment if you'd like to as well, express any comment or share anything with me. So let me tilt the camera down and we'll get started. Okay, so you're going to need to go to your pack, your pattern, and you may have bought the pattern on its own, in which case you need to go to your copy of the pattern. And I've actually taken a photocopy of the pattern so that I could write on this one, and then I save my master copy of my pattern separately so that I've always got that. The first thing that you'll know that I've done is I've actually put on, let me just get a pen and my seam gauge here to show you. I've actually drawn on the 1/4 inch seam allowance because Claire and Richard are both professionally trained tailors, and therefore and pattern cutters, so they have they've drawn the patterns all without any seam allowance, which is how it's done in the professional tailoring world. But because I come from a domestic home sewing background, then I like to have my seam allowance onto my pattern so that I can work with that. And in this case, I'm just using 1/4 inch all the way round. So I've just taken my seam gauge, I've found my 1/2 centimetre or 1/4 inch, and then out from the sewing line, the firm line that's marked, I then just go and put some lines. I keep my marker at right angles to the sewing line and just put my marks on, and then I've just gone back in again and then just drawn that in, and I've done that around all of the edges on the hat and all of the edges on the brim as well, and you'll need to do the same. And then what I've done then is, because then I don't like to cut out and use the photocopier paper because it's just so stiff. If I just go into my kit box, I am enjoying having the little box actually for keeping everything together. Then in here I have got some tracing pattern piece. So I had a bigger piece of tracing paper which I laid over the top of the pattern. I've then traced around the pattern on the extra line with the seam allowance, and then I've then cut out my tracing paper pattern that I will then use to put onto my fabric. I've put on it that it's the hat, I've put on it cut 2. We've got 2 points here where we need to gather the fabric around, which we can do. And then I've also done exactly the same for the brim, and I've traced that off and cut that out too. Now we will need to trace off some interfacing at the original size of the pattern piece as well, because we don't need seam allowance on the actual brim itself, the interfacing to go in the trim. So I will just trace that round through my interfacing, and I'll show you how to do that in a second or two. So that will get your pattern all ready, and then you'll need to then go into your kit if you're using it, and then we've got a piece of fabric here marked for the hat and for the dress bodice, and that's what we're then going to use then to be able to do our hat, our bonnet, whatever you want to call it. So if you want to get your pattern all ready, find your fabric. This one isn't too badly creased, I'll probably just go with this as it is, but iron your fabric if it's too creased, so that you've got a nice piece of fabric to work with, nice and flat. And then come back to me and we'll start and chat about how to place your pattern onto the fabric using your grain line, and we'll get cut out and ready to sew. Okay, so first thing we need to remember is that we're going to avoid the selvage edge. This is the bound edge on the edge of the fabric, and it usually has these little holes through, and that's where the fabric has been loaded onto the some big rollers with pins sticking up, which then move the fabric evenly through the printing process, because this design here has been printed on there very beautifully. But we wouldn't sew with that, because when you wash and dry the selvage edge, sometimes it puckers up a bit, and we don't want that to happen on our finished garment, so we wouldn't use that part. So we just need to bear in mind we're going to come in from the selvage edge. So the first thing I start to do is just roughly have a look at my fabric and make sure it's all nice and straight. We haven't got any pieces on the fold, so we don't need to worry about that. But I do try to make the best of my fabric. So I've got only folded over enough here for the actual hat itself. And then what I have noticed is that if I put the brim right down on the very bottom there, and if I go just slightly wider, we'll be able to get the brim cut out of the bottom just there as well. So let me just move this fabric just a little smidge more, just to give us that extra that we need. That gives it, just finger press that fold down, so that gives us that area to work with. And let's just try the brim piece on again. Yeah, that's going to fit on there just nicely. Because we need to cut 2 of the brim and we need to cut 2 of the hat. And we can just get that in. I might just lose a smidge of my seam allowance on my brim, but I'm not too worried about that. I can just remember that that's slightly smaller at that point. But what we do need to remember is that we've got these grain lines, which is this line here, and then it's got the arrows on both sides, at both ends. And when you're working with felt, when we were making our cat, we didn't need to worry about the grain line, because there's no grain on felt. You can put your pieces any which way you like. But once we start working with fabric, we know we've got warp threads and weft threads. I'm not sure which way round they go, but they're crossing over through the fabric, and that's what makes the fabric nice and stable. So we want to be keeping these grain lines in line with the fibres in the fabric, because that will give us the best result. If you cut it and it's slightly off, your garment can twist when it's being worn. So that's why it's really important to get the seam lines right. And the way that we check those out is we have our tape measure, and we'll have some pins. The first thing I'm going to do is just find my pen again. And what I suggest you do is just extend your grain line higher up to the top of your garment and down further than it is already. So I've just extended that grain line there. Because what it means is that when we put our fabric back on again, we can measure top and bottom of this line to our folded edge, and that will then tell us if we're straight or not. So when we're looking at let's just do our fabric first. So if we go to the selvage edge of our fabric, we can check that this is straight anyway. So that's smack on 18 centimetres, I can see at this end. So if I go down here, I can see that we're smack on 18 as well. If that was 17 or 16 or 19, we'd know that the end of the fabric was slightly skew-if, and we needed that to be straight first. So because it's equal from here to the folded edge there, and equal here from the folded edge to here, we know that this line here is straight just by the mathematics of it. So now what we can do is now look at our pattern pieces. So what I tend to do is put a pattern piece on the top, and then I will then just pin it, usually in the seam allowance if I can, just to hold that together, and then I will measure it. So from our grain line to our folded edge, we're 12.5 centimetres at the top. Then I will go down to the bottom of my grain line down here, and I want to be 12.5 centimetres there. And if I'm too much, it's because the line's going that way, and too little, the line's going that way. So we make sure that that's smack on 12.5 again for that line. And then when we're ready and we're sure we've got that lined up, then we'll put a pin at the bottom of that line just there. So that now we can go around this pattern piece now, and we can put the rest of our pins in, knowing that that pattern piece is straight of grain, and everything's all just as we want it to be. And this is exactly the same if you're dressmaking for yourself, or if you're dressmaking for children, or if you're doing home decor, cushions and things like that, then again you can use your grain lines to make sure you've got your pattern pieces straight on your fabric. Okay. So the next thing there, that's that piece on there. So let's have a look at our brim, and we've still got a grain line on our brim, but I'm going to probably use the bottom of the fabric here, because the grain line is only really, is very short on the brim. So if I just pop that along. Make sure that we've got an edge there, then that looks all fine to me. And I'm just going to pin that in place on there so that that's all nice and straight too. Once these are all pinned on, then I'm going to get my scissors and we'll cut these out, and that will give us our 2 pieces of fabric the same shape and the same size so that we can start and make our hat. But first of all, the next thing we're going to be doing after we've cut out our fabric is I'm just going to be tracing around the pattern with I've got some interfacing, but I'll come on to that in a second. Let me get my scissors and cut this out, and then we'll move on to the next bit. Okay, so we've got my hat and our brim cut out. I've put the rest of the fabric back in my box to keep that together. And now I just need 2 pieces of the interfacing, and I can see through this to be able to trace that first one off. So let's just pop that on top there. I'm going to use my heat erasable Frixion pen. I'm just tracing it on the sewing line through from the pattern. And I'll do that twice, and then I will sew that into the middle of, not sew that, I will iron that on onto our piece of fabric for the brim on each side. That'll give it a nice stiff brim so that when we're sewing this bonnet it's going to get a lovely shape to it. Just see if I can get the other one out the other side. Yes, just okay, that's good on my scrap of interfacing there. Just keep it as neat as you can do. More important on the actual fabric than it is the interfacing, but still, if you can stay true to the shape, then that will actually give you the best results possible. Just trim that bit out. And then I'll get my ironing mat, and then we're going to iron this onto our brim pieces. Okay, back in a second. Okay, so we're ready to go with our brim piece. I'm just going to turn those over so that I've got the wrong side of the brim up. And the first thing I'm going to do is just give them a quick press over, because I just like to press these first just to make sure that they're all nice and flat. We don't want to go and iron any creases in at all. Then I'm going to take my 2 brim pieces and I'm going to lay those in the middle, just trying to maintain that 1/4 inch seam allowance that we drew on before, just roughly. There's the other. And on your interfacing, if it's an iron-on one, you'll have a bobbly side and you'll have a smooth side. And it's the bobbly side is actually little dots of glue. And so that side is what you want to put down onto your fabric so that it'll glue onto your piece of fabric and not onto the bottom of your iron. Yes, I have done that before, especially when you're in a rush. So just make sure the bobbly side is down and the smooth side is up. The other thing is that a nice hot iron doesn't like interfacing very much, and if you're not careful you will melt your interfacing and it'll stick to the bottom of your iron. So I do recommend you use a press cloth. Now I've got this silk organza that I use here, which is great, and you can just buy this by the metre off, I get mine off eBay, but you can buy this from the metre from a lot of online retailers or otherwise, and it is pure silk, but it's got a stiffness to it, but it's transparent so you can see through it. So I like that because I can then see what's happening. But the silk organza will absorb most of the actual heat of the iron, whilst it'll take the harshness off the heat of the iron, but letting the heat actually go through onto the piece that you're trying to glue down. And you need to keep your iron down in place long enough for the glue to melt and then to adhere to the fabric below it. And again, that's why it's having quite a lot of heat put on it. That's why we need the press cloth on it. If you've not got any silk organza, you can use a fabric handkerchief. They work really well. I've also used tea towels before. You might need to just keep your iron on a little bit longer because it'll take longer for the heat to get through, and obviously use a thin tea towel if you can do, or just a scrap piece of fabric. If you've got a little piece of fabric that's a cotton, a natural fibre or a linen, you can use that as well, and that will actually help as well. Anything just to provide that little bit of a barrier between your interfacing and your fabric. And then once that's done, then we can see that that has stiffened that fabric up nicely. So if we look at this scrap of fabric here, that's not got any interfacing on and it'll crinkle up quite nicely. But now look at this, it's so much stiffer in terms of that. So that's going to make a really nice brim on there, on that hat for us. So for now we're going to move our ironing board to the one side, and then we're going to be getting our sewing machine lined up. I'm going to use an off-white thread for my stitching, main stitching, or you could use a pink if you wanted to, that's up to you, but I think I'm going to use an off-white, or you could even use a green if you wanted as well, and then we'll then get started on our hat. So the first bit of stitching we're going to do is going to be on the brim. So let's just turn this brim so that we've got our right sides together. So we're going to put those two lovely printed sides together, and I must say I do really, really love this print on this fabric. I want my pins. Whoops. And we're just going to pin this so that we can hold this together whilst we're sewing it. So I'm just going to the two edges first and pin those in, just at right angles to the seam will do for now, and then a couple along this curved edge, because we're going to start at one side and then we're going to sew along this curved edge. So I'm going to start here, reverse stitch there up to the top, we're going to pivot at that point round the curve here, back down to here, pivot there and down to the bottom. And I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and the way that I check that I've got, because I use the edge of my presser foot as being my indicator for 1/4 inch. You can use whatever you like and what you're used to using, but this works really well for me. And what I do is I just put the edge of my measure behind my needle and hold it with my, just put my finger against the needle, and then that gives me a buffer to hold it up against. And I know that if I go to position 6.5 on mine, then that gives me 1/4 inch to the edge of my presser foot. So that works really well. I'm sure you'll have your way of doing this as well. So let me just start on the edge just here, find my pedal, and I'm going to reverse stitch on first, and then I'm going to use my needle down button, which will put my needle down into my work, and then it'll always finish in there. If you've not got that, use your hand crank on the far side of your machine, and you can hand crank that needle up or down each time you stop. Take that first pin out because we don't sew over pins, and then we're going to sew up until this edge until we get to about 1/4 inch from the edge, probably another stitch. Oops, that was 2, so undo that one and just go back onto that one, and that's about right. Okay, so now I've left my needle in the work, lifted up my presser foot, and then I can move my work around because my needle is holding it in one place. I can position it in the new position for coming around this curve, and now we can just set off sewing around this edge here. We do a bit, and then to come up to the pins we'll just take those out. It's quite a nice gentle curve, so we shouldn't need to pivot, I don't think, on here. But if we do, we can leave the needle in the work and just lift our presser foot up and just adjust our edge, so that we've always got the edge of the fabric against the edge of our presser foot. Keeps it nice and neat, and then I don't have to watch the needle, and my edge of my presser foot is my guide. Coming up to that pin, take that one out. A bit more of a curve around here, out towards the corner, and that pin's getting in the way, so I'm going to take that one out. Should be fine for now. Just going to pivot towards this side here. I need a couple more stitches, and then we can pivot down this side here, and down to the bottom, and just reverse at the edge there. Needle out of the work, take off our ending threads and our starting threads, and that's where we are. So you may not be able to see, but we've got reverse stitching here, up to here, around the edge here, on the edge really of following the edge of the interfacing, and then down to the edge here, and then I've reverse stitched there. Now, because this is on a curve, we're actually going to clip this with our pinking shears. You might call them crimping shears. So this is the ones with the triangular blades in them. If you've not got any of those, then you can go along your edge, and you're just going to take out some little triangles like this out of your work, out of this edge, because this edge has got to curve, and if we want it to sit nice and flat, then we need to remove some of that bulk from out of the edge and allow this to sit inside when it turns through. And if you're not sure about whether the clipping the curves works for you or not, then what I've done with other video tutorials before, because I do think it's always good to be demonstrated and to actually understand it for yourself as to why it makes such a difference. So let's clip out half of it first so that you can actually have a look and see how this is going to sit. So if you've not got pinking shears, you'll do it this way. If you have got pinking shears, you can just snip straight across that edge. So we've gone to about halfway. So now, if we go into the inside and we turn this around, or let's just take off this edge first. So on the corners, just take off your corners just to reduce that bulk there. Usually just take it just slightly wider than the corner. We'll do that on both sides. Then if we just then fold this back through, then when you've got your feet, we're going to press this in a second just to make sure this is all going to lie nice and flat. But when you are running your fingers along, the side that we've actually already pinked and taken those triangles out of will always sit much more smoother under your fingers when you run your fingers along from the outside. But if I run my fingers from the inside, I can feel little bumps where there's too much fabric under there. So have a little try of that, especially if you're new to sewing, because then that's a really good way of just understanding what's happening, because I know that I do want to go back and then finish off all of those little triangles out along this edge just here. And we tend to clip every curve, and we'll be doing this definitely on our bodices when we come on to doing those and just getting those all sorted. So you do get used to it, to doing it a lot in sewing. It feels a bit strange at first because you're not sure how it's going to make all that difference, but hopefully just doing that little test will just show you what a difference it does make. So just do that all the way along, and then you're going to then fold your brim round the right way round, and you're going to press it as well, and just to make sure that it's all lying nice and flat and ready for the next stage. So that's what it's going to look like once you've got all your bits cut through. Okay, come back to you in a second when I've pressed this. Once we're all pressed and flat, we've got a nice brim there, and it's quite nice and stiff as well, which is great. So we'll just let that cool down, and then that's ready for the next stages. Okay, so the next stage then is to take a note of where the little dots are on the edge of our sewing our hat. So let's just take our pins out for now, and we know that they're on the corners in here, so I'm just going to take off our pattern, and on one side I'm just going to draw a dot just about 1/4 inch in from that edge just there. Just about there, it's about right. You get to be able to eyeball it after a bit. It just takes a little while to get used to where it is at first, and that's 1/4 inch just there. So I've got 2 little dots on my fabric to show me where that is, and now I'm going to put these 2 pieces of fabric right sides together, so the printed sides are together on the inside, and then we're just going to put some pins in to hold that together. Let me do it from the side so I can see my dots. That would be useful, wouldn't it? Now at this stage I'm not going to pin round the extra here, because all we're going to sew is from here, from the dot down into the corner there, across the bottom, and pivot again there, and then up to this corner just here. That's all we need to do at this stage. So let's get our machine ready. Let's pop our needle so that that's going to be on the edge there. And we're going to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back on that from that dot, and then we're going to go down into 1/4 inch from the edge down the bottom, and then we're going to stop and pivot and then come across the flat edge. So we're in line with our dot again, and then we're going to leave our needle in the work, pivot our work round and take our pin out, and then we're going to end on the other dot the other side and reverse. Move it out of our work, and then we're going to take off our threads. So we started on the dot, up, across all the way along here, and then down to the dot again and reverse stitch there. And then what we're going to do is we are going to just take off the corners here. So again, we're just going to look for where the end of our stitching line is. You can't see it very much here. I should have used the pink thread, shouldn't I, really, so you could see. But we're just going to take off that edge there, not going through your stitches, but just a few fibres away from your corner, from your stitches, and take that edge off there, because that will help reduce the bulk when we turn this round. Put those bits in the bin. Because then what we're going to do then is just turn this around, and then we can use a turning tool or a pin just to pull out those corners, just to make sure that that's going to sit nice and flat now and give us that little piece at the back of the neck. And make sure this is all going to sit all nice. The other thing that we probably should do is, just before we do that, let me just turn this back again in a second, is I just want you to take a little snip just from the corner of before it starts to curve to the dot. Just do a little snip on the edge, because that will help you turn it through, because my edges weren't coming out quite nicely. Again, on there, just the edge until that snip. And now when we turn that through, we'll see that seam allowance will pop out nicely. So that's down that side. And it won't compromise your seam at all, so don't worry. That little snip won't, and that's what that looks like. And then I want you to just roll this seam along this flat edge between your finger and thumb, and then just take that to the ironing board and just press that flat for that straight edge, okay? So the next thing that we're going to be doing now is with both sides together of so you've got both of your wrong sides together. This is our flat bit that we've just sewn, and we've got that seam allowance now sticking out on those edges because we put that little snip in, so that allows that seam allowance to come out. Is we're going to put some gathering stitches around the edge of our circumference of the circle for the hat. And what we need to do is we need to let off the tension so that we've got a loose bobbin thread, and we also increase the stitch length as well, so that we can have some nice easy gathering stitches to work with. If you haven't gathered anything before, then what I would suggest you do is have a little go on some scrap fabric. The other thing that I do is I've changed my thread over to the pink, so I'll have pink thread as my gathering thread. And then when I come to actually stitch this, I'm going to then put my off-white colour back in again, thread in again, so that I know which is my gathering stitches and which are my sewing stitches. And that works really well, especially when you are a beginner. Sometimes you can manage with both, just using the same colour thread, but I do find that this is quite useful to know which threads to pull it out at the end, because we will take the gathering threads out at the end. So we're going to do we're going to do 2 rows of stitching around the outside here, and we're going to leave a tail on the end. So if you've got a machine that cuts your threads off, then you need to disable that for the moment, because you need to have some threads to be able to pull on. And we're going to have 1 row of stitching just slightly less than our seam allowance, say perhaps at 1/8 of an inch, and then we're going to have one that is slightly more than our seam allowance, and it actually comes into the side of the hat here. Don't worry about the stitches being shown on the inside, because we're going to remove them at the end, and any pinpricks you can just rub your fingernail over, and usually that will get it out. The exception is satin, if you're doing a satin hat, or very fine silk. So don't do it if you got either of those fabrics, but on this quilting cotton or this Rose and Hubble cotton for dressmaking, then you should be absolutely fine. So let's take our tension down. So mine's just under 5 at the moment. So I'm going to take my tension down to a 2.5, and I'm going to take my stitch length up to a 4, and that will then give us enough to then work through. So now I'm going to take just position the presser foot so that the edge is slightly in 1/8 of an inch, and I'm not going to reverse stitch. We're just going to use the edge of the presser foot, and we're just going to go round, just nice and gently, round the edge. Now, every now and again, we are going to need to pivot because it's quite a sharp curve. If you want to pin these 2 pieces of fabric together, please do so. I haven't. I've just jumped straight in. We'll see if I regret that in a minute or two. But if your fabric seems like it's bunching up, just lift up your presser foot with your needle in the work, and you'll be able to just manipulate that out so that it all sits all nicely. So again, let's just move that round. So this is our first row. Just keep manoeuvring that. And then when you get to the end, if you notice I didn't do any reverse stitches, just go to the end and then take your needle out the work, and then you want to cut your threads but leave a tail. So you want to leave your starting threads on and your finishing threads on. There's our first row of stitches all the way round. Now we're going to put it back in again, and we're going to now stitch slightly wider than we need for our seam allowance. So you've got one row of stitches in the seam allowance and one stitch wider than the seam allowance into your garment. And we're leaving a tail again, and just nice and steady round. Let's put the needle in the work so we can pivot that and just take the pressure off the fabric. And sometimes you can kind of anchor your fabric down as you're going round. And the idea is that when you actually stitch this together with it, and we do the proper stitches. Oh, did you see me take my needle out of the work then? I haven't got my needle down. The idea is that when we then stitch, we're going to stitch our final stitches in between those two rows of gathering. And it works really well to give you a really nice gathered edge. So that's that out. So that's laver tail. So you're going to have all these loose threads that are going to feel a bit weird for you, and you're going to want to cut them off, but don't, because we need to pull on those to gather those up. So I've got 2 rows of stitching, one just there and one just here, and then these are my starting and ending threads there and there. Okay, so the next thing then that we're going to do is, usually if you gather your bobbins threads up, then that's usually better, but the first thing I'm going to suggest you do is, because we've finished now gathering, just go back and just change your tension back up to where it was. So mine's just under 5, because we'll forget, and if we're not careful we'll end up having a loose tension with the rest of our sewing, and we don't want that. What we then do then is I usually take a quick unpick, and you want to separate out the 2 top threads from the 2 bottom threads. So there's the 2 top threads on this side of the fabric, and there's my 2 bottom threads on the bottom. And then if we hold on to the threads here with our finger and thumb, and then hold on to the fabric with our finger and thumb here, pull on the threads and hold on to your fabric, and it will start to gather up, look. And you can then move those gathers further round your hat. So we keep pulling on those. Don't pull so tight that you snap your threads, because you'll have to go back and put some more in. But you just want to gather it enough so that you've got things started to go. I always gather from one side in towards the middle, and then from the other side into the middle. So let's go back to this other side here. Let's take our 2 threads for the top, and that's having the quick unpick just separates them nice and easily. And then finger and thumb here. And then we can just pull on those threads and move those gathers around the hat. And then you're going to end up with something that's starting to get some shape to it like this. So it's a fully lined hat, as you can see. Okay. So get yourself to that stage, and then we'll move on to the next bit. So the next stage that you're going to need is, you're going to need your brim. And we're going to open up the brim, so we're going to work with one side of the brim only. So you're going to work on the inside here. So can you see that's the inside of the brim? So we've got one side here. And we're going to start with right where we started first off. We're going to put our sewn edge here, that straight bit, and we're going to line it up with the edge of the hat just there. And we're going to put a pin in there, and I'm going to suggest you put it at right angles to the edge that we're going to be sewing. Then we're going to, and it's going to feel a bit fiddly, we're going to then scoot all the way round to the other side, and we've got the other flat bit of the hat and the brim, and we want to again on the inside, so you're working with one side only, we're going to put the other side of that brim right on the edge of the fabric, just at the other edge of those gathered edges. So you're almost putting your gathered point together. I'll show you in a second. So here's the brim, and here's all of the gathering of the hat just here. Oops, dropped it. And I've not got nearly enough gathers in mind. So let's look for the long threads here, and let's gather this up some more because we need to have this to fit. So we want this, the round edge that went all the way around the edge of the pattern here is what we're gathering up now. And you know when we were using the edge of the brim pattern, so this point here is at that point there, so on the pattern. And then all of those gathers there is all going to go into this long straight edge just there, not the curved edge because that's the peak of the hat, just there. It'll all make sense. But we need to have lots of gathers all pulled in. So look for your long threads because they're the ones that you've pulled already. And then we're going to move the gathers along until the edge of the circular edge of the hat is equal to the circular edge. And if you've not already, what we might be an idea is if we just put a little mark, a little notch on the edge of our hat. So I'm going to do that for future reference. So I've just folded my pattern piece for my brim in half, and I'm going to put a little notch at the centre point just there. Actually, it wants to be on the flat edge, doesn't it? Not on the curved edge, on the flat edge just here. And then if we take our hat pattern and fold that in half, and then open it out, then we're going to have a notch just here. So the flat edge here is going to go against that point just there. If you were working with paper, let's just pin that one there just to show you. So that's the starting point. And then we're gathering up all of this edge here so that your edge of your brim here is going to start at that point just there. So that would be our other point. And then the same on the other side. So this flat bit here with a brim is going to then go all the way round and come back down to here. So hopefully I'm showing you on paper, it helps a little bit with that halfway point marked on it, because that would be useful to match that up. So let me go back to our fabric version, find our long threads. I haven't got my halfway point marked, so I just need to just gather mine up until it's the right length. Still a little bit long, I think. Oh, wait, oh, we're nearly there. Where's my other long threads gone? There they are, there's one. There's the other one. So I try to gather from each side into the middle because that tends to work well for me. And then we want to just move those gathers around to make sure that they're all okay. And you want in the curved edge of the outside of your hat to match the flat edge of the brim. And then once you've got that right, let's put a few pins in just to hold it. So I'm opening out my brim to pin inside because we only want one side of the brim sewn to that gathered edge at the moment, because this is the way that Claire has designed this is to give us a really nice finish. So just make sure that all your gathers are nice and even and you've not got any flat spots. Just gather that down a bit more. That's it. And then put some pins in. So this is what it's going to look like. So I've got all of my gathers on the inside, and then on the outside I've pulled apart one side of my brim. Can you see the curved edge of the brim out of the way so that I could pin it on the inside, because then when we turn this round we're going to have the brim and we're going to have the nice gathered edge back bit of the hat. It's going to feel a little bit fiddly, and I've just flicked it round so that we're on the inside of their brim because I think that's going to be the easiest way to work with this. And I'm going to just pull this out now so that the seam allowance is going to be just pushing inside the hat of the brim is pushing inside to the curves of the hat. Oh, Need to change our thread over again. Let me just do that. Okay, thread's changed. Let's take some stitch length back down to 2.2. Oh no, 2 as Claire said, didn't she, to sew these. And then I'm going to just start at the edge of the brim. So that's the flat bit at the back of the neck of the hat, of the gathered bit. So that bit there is this bit here on the pattern. And I'm going to start and sew here, and we're going to sew all the way around these gathered edges. And it's going to be quite tight, so we're going to have to just take our time. Line it up with the edge of the work. Get my press foot. So a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work and take the first pin out. I can find my pin position. Okay, and we're just going to keep rolling it like we did before. And we're just going to do a few stitches round. And if you've got your awl to hand, which is your pointed tool, this can be quite useful just for holding everything flat for you. Take your pins out as you come to them and just roll it round towards you like we did when we were doing the bloomers. With the presser up just to release any pressure under the foot. I think the bonnet's a little bit difficult to try and to explain. I hope I've explained it adequately enough for you to see what you think you're doing, and hopefully make a good go at an attempt at it. If not, you'll have to ask me in the instructions, and I'll try in the future to perhaps have another go, maybe work on a bigger size so that I can show you a little bit better. Just make sure your gathers and your raw edges of your fabric are together. And then just roll this further forward just so that we can, I'm coming off to the edge now. I'll just reverse at the end. Needle out of the work. Let's take this out and let's have a little look and see how we've done. Go back to our starting threads and take those off. Just careful not to cut through any of your pink threads because are you gathering threads? So mine are pink threads, aren't they? But yours might be a different colour. And then let's just fold this round. So there's the inside of the brim look, and that's where we've got the edge of the bonnet against there to start off with, and we started on the edges there. So let's just put that brim back into where it should be, and then have a look at the back just here. And that's looking good so far. We've got it caught in there. That's at the start and end, and that's at the start and end, so I'm happy with that. Because what we're going to do now, if I turn it inside out and find the edge of the brim that we haven't sewn through yet, we're actually going to fold that under by the 1/4 inch, and then that will get stitched down, hand stitched down, or you can machine stitch it, but it'll be needed to hand stitch it down onto the stitches that you've just sewn in the white. But before we do that, let's take out our gathering threads. So I usually separate out my gathering threads, just doing one at a time, and then I'll pull on one until it pulls all the way through from the other side. And that's why it makes it easy if you know you've got pink ones or you've got a colour, then go on to the other one and then give that one a pull too, and that should pull it out as well, nice and easily. And then on the other side you just need to find your other two, so there should be 4 threads that you pull out in total, and then that releases those gathers for you. Because then if we have a look on this side here, we can see all those lovely gathers are just right, just into at right angles to that brim edge. It's a little bit difficult to see on this fabric, but I think you can see all right. So there's the brim, there's the gathers for the back of the hat. So let me just push it back inside for a moment while we just talk about this inside edge, because we can trim off some of the seam allowance if we want from the gathers, but I think I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to leave mine where they are, and I'm going to just tuck under that 1/4 inch, because we've sewn the other side at 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to put a pin in just to hold this edge down. So can you see how the edge is poking up? Tuck that under, along with any fraying there might be, and especially on these corners just here, look, to get that nicely in. And you're covering up all of that gathered edge. So there's the gathered edge inside, look, and we're folding the brim over the edge and put a pin to hold it, and that's going to give you a really lovely, neat finish. So let's put that bit in, tuck that under 1/4 inch. Try not to go any more than 1/4 inch, otherwise you're going to lose the shape of your brim. And then a pin down there. Just neaten off your edges here. That should just, because we did that little snip at the side, you should be able to just get that really neatly in. And there's Clara's little hat, all looking all beautiful. So we have got to do a couple of little gathers at the back here, I think, just to hold that together. But let's neaten off this brim first. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting excited, can you tell? So I'm going to just thread up a hand sewing needle, and I'm just going to now just make sure that's tucked in at those edges there, so you've got your little bit that's dropping down off of the back of the neck, and I'm just going to sew the edge of the brim, hand stitch it down to the stitches that we've used to sew the gathers onto the other brim. Let me do that now. I think I need my glasses as well, because it's quite fine work, isn't it? So let's do that. Take some thread off the machine to use. And thread our needle. I'm just going to use a single thread. I don't think it needs to be double, because it's just going to hold that brim down, isn't it? And so let's bury our thread first in the seam allowance at the end here. So bury our knot. Just use your needle just to tuck that in and just have that all sitting all nice and neatly. And then you're going to take a first stitch through the bit of the seam allowance that you are settling down, and a couple of stitches just to anchor that down. And then we can move along the stitch line that we did and take a bite where the stitches are, and then a bite just on the edge of the brim. So just on the edge nearest the gathers. And that's just going to then start and neaten this off. And once you get to your stitches, you can start and catch through your stitch a little bit of the fabric as well on the gathers. And what you're aiming for is for not being able to see your stitches on the outside. Just take your time. Through the stitch line is usually a good way, and then through the edge of the brim. Pins just slightly out. Use the edge of the needle just to push that stitch line in so that you've got it the same on both sides. And there's no way that you can sew this both sides of the brim at the same time and get a neat finish. You have to do it like this in order to get a neat finish, because otherwise you'll be able to see the raw edges of the gather on one side or the other. And I've tried machine stitching this type of thing or type of finish before on like the inside of a dress, and it doesn't work. So it unfortunately, hand stitching is your best friend for this bit. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on all the way along here, along that stitched edge, just to the edge of the brim. And then we'll talk about attaching the ribbons, because we've got some beautiful ribbon to attach to this bonnet. Ready for Clara. Okay, I'll come back to you in a minute. Okay, so here's our little hat, looking all, well, bonnet really. It's more of a bonnet than a hat, isn't it? Let's get our Clara and put on her bonnet on here, just to see how it's looking. There it is on the back. And there is talk here about having 3 little tucks at both sides of the hat, just to give that the right shape. Obviously her ears are in the wrong place, as we've spoken about already, so that we can get that sorted. Let me just have a quick look at the picture. Yeah, so she has the brim forward and then the bulk of the hat here. So let's just put 3 little tucks in the side here. 1, 2. Let's get our thread and needle and thread and do that. And then we'll sew the ribbon on. We want it to fit first, don't we? Our quilter's not. And I think first of all what we'll do is we'll just pin those little tucks in first so that we can make sure that they're actually going to be the right size. So I'm just going to put 3 little tucks, just put a little pleat in, and I'm just putting a little pin either side, well just through that tuck. So that's 1, 2, 3 there. And let's see if we can do the same the other side. I might have been too generous with my little tucks. I might only manage 2 either side because mine are quite... So I've taken 1 pin out of the other one. So I've got 2 going one side and 2 the other, and then with a bit of a flat bit in the middle. And we'll try that and see if that's how mine looks. So I've got a tuck going, 2 tucks going that way and 2 tucks going this way. See how that fits on the back of Clara's neck. I think I've been too generous again. Just take her ears off for a second. Yeah, no, we need room for her ears, don't we? So I've got too many there. So let me just take out the 2 nearest tucks and just see if we only have to have 1 tuck. Yeah, I think I'm trying to do my tucks too big, because that's supposed to stick down at the back of her neck, isn't it? This is all going to puff out nicely once we've got sorted. So what I've done is I've just done 1 tuck either side of the back of the neck. I'm just going to put a little knot in my thread, and I'm just going to tuck, just catch that little pleat down, because that's just finalising that edge, isn't it? I'm just almost just catching it halfway, just about a centimetre up from the edge, not all the way through, and doing several stitches just in one place together, just to hold that tuck in place. And put my needle so that the thread goes between the 2 sides of the thread, the fabric. Take that pin out, that's 1 little tuck in. So you're just trying to get your hat to fit at the back of the neck so that it sort of cinches in a little bit. And I can bury my knot in the centre there. Just to take the ends off the knot. And then just almost in line with the edge of the brim, I'm just doing a few stitches just in place, just to sort of hold that, cinch that in. Take the pin out, don't need that anymore. And I'm just burying my thread by putting my needle between the 2 pieces of fabric, so that fabric's double, and just running it down the inside, and then we can take that off. It just gives it that little bit of a long edge, doesn't it, for us? So let's try you again with your hat, Clara. Yeah, you see we've got to have room for the ears to fit in there as well. And that's going to push up. And then on the back of the neck, we've got a flat bit with a little tuck either side. And I'm happy with that for now. I can always change that later if I want to and put another one in. But for now, that's what it looks like on the inside. Little tuck just there, look. Another little tuck just there. That's what it looks like from the outside. Little tuck just there and just there along that flat edge. She's looking super sweet though, isn't she? Right, into our kit again. Let's find our crushed ribbon, the pink. Here it is. And then I'm going to put the 2 ends together, and then leaving it fairly crushed, I'm just going to find a halfway point and just cut through. And then I'm going to change over to a baby pink, I think. So I've got a pink thread there that's going to match the ribbon, and take a length off. It does help to have a stash of threads, doesn't it? And you might have some from other projects that you can use. I'll just put my glasses on so I can thread my needle without you having to wait. Right. Now it doesn't say where to attach the ribbon on the back of the brim hat, but we know that we're going to have a bit of a rough edge here, so we know we want to fold over on our ribbon and over again to kind of encase that raw edge. And then I'm just going to put my folded edge of my ribbon in line with the hand stitched edge of that brim. Bring my needle out underneath that so it'll just hold that. Take off the ends of my knot. And I'm just going to sew the folded edge of the ribbon to the edge of the brim on the inside of the hat. I don't want to interfere with the way that the brim fits the head. And that'll give us a nice little anchor point, won't it? That's got it caught down one edge, and then I'm going to fold the bulk of the ribbon back, and I'm just going to then catch along the edge here, oops, without going through the ribbon, just one stitch, just so that we can catch the edge, and it'll just encase that folded edge that we've got, and just sew that on the edge there. Hard to see, isn't it? Sorry, when it's all so tiny. I'm going to do it again in a second though. I suppose I'm just kind of finding my way through to how to do this. Just make sure you've not got any loops in your threads, so it's all nice and neat. So there's my ribbon there, and I thought if I show you on this end here, I found the raw edge of the ribbon and I folded it over towards me and then over again. So the actual cut edge of the ribbon, just untangle it a bit because of it being crushed ribbon, it's got lots of creases in it, but it gives a really nice effect. So you've got the edge of the ribbon is actually folded into the centre there, and that's what I've then offered up to the hat, and I've sewn that on the inside. But you want to be able to catch the edge, the folded edge first, but then you've got to come back and catch this other edge, otherwise it'll unfold on you. I'll just make sure that's not got caught through there. So I've got one row of stitches along the back just there, and one row of stitches just along here. So I've kind of done like a rectangle holding that on, and then the raw edge of the ribbon is actually in that section just there. So now I've not got your ears on yet, Clara, but just bear with me. Now when I just tie a bow in this, just to see how that's going to look. And that's looking really sweet. Probably a bit too big a bow, but her hat's on, and we'll get her ears on soon. It's got a nice shape on the back of her neck there, and then we can pull that back slightly for her ears, can't we? Because they're going to fit in under here. Okay, so I think we've finished her hat for now. So I suppose we're going to have a look and see how we're going to just get these ears right, aren't we? We know we want a little bit of shaping in them, so we want a little bit of a crease in the front. And I'm going to have that crease on the edge, on the crease of the actual face seam. So let's just try that one just there. They're quite a lot further forward than I thought they were going to be, but that's fine. Let's get that on there and see how they look just there with the hat. So they've come quite a way forward if you look. So let's put our hat brim back on again. Maybe they're too far forward. It's going to be trial and error again, folks. There's a little bit of that when they're making these characters, isn't there? So let's take it just down ahead a little bit more. We're not quite right. I'm going to go back slightly and up slightly. And I can show you when I'm finally happy. At least you can see the kind of the process to go through to be sure when yours are. And only you can say when so that's perhaps better. Maybe that's better. Only you can say when you're happy with your ears. Yeah, I think that's going to be where I'm going to have mine. I think they look quite nice. They're quite kind of flattened to a head, but that's fine. They're not looking too big. So if I let me take her hat off now, and I can show you. So if I show you like that, look. So the bulk of the back of her head is without her ears. I think I had them up here before, up in the, like on this top bit, but actually they're quite far forward now. And I'm going to use I'm going to do pink thread first and just attach them on from the inside there, and then I'm going to get some light grey thread and I'm going to stitch them back from here. That is my theory. Well, that's a nice pink. I can use this one, can't I? And I'm going to use a single thread because I don't want them to be noticed where we've stitched these on. You're finally getting your ears, Clara. You've waited a while for these. Right, glasses on so we can see what we're doing. Let's bury the thread first up inside this edge here, and then I can come out just halfway along the ear, just along there. Don't pull it too tight, and I'm going to take a little bite of the ear felt, the pink, and then a little bite of the grey, just to attach those all the way along. Bite of the pink and a little bite of the grey. Do it in 2 stages if you feel like you want to. Oh, I'm going to lose my end of my thread. We can pull these in a little bit more, can't we, as we go along. Just remember you can just push in on your character's head just to indent it slightly, just to be able to get your bite. I'm going to tuck that section there under because I don't want that to come too far forward. So let me take that pin out for now because we've got it in place. So a bit of the edge of the ear. Let's do it in 2 stages because I want to tuck that under. That's looking nice. Let's go in from this side now. So I'm going to tuck in that edge there because we want the pink to be on the inside of the ear, not on the outside of the ear. So I'm just going to kind of push that in a little bit with the edge of my needle. Just going to be trial and error, guys, and just while you're trying to get these on neatly so that you're happy with them, then we can just fold them back slightly and just go back along that edge. Just cinch it in a little bit tighter. So it's got caught on the outside. Just trying to get just a small bite of the pink felt because we don't want the stitches to be seen, but we'll be able to do a bit more stitching when we put the grey on. This is just to hold the edge of the pink in place, really. So there's her ear stitched on for now, just the pink bit. fold that pink under because I want the grey to be finishing. So let's take a couple of stitches on the end here. So that's going to hold that tight, and then I'm going to bury the needle in and through the head so we've got a nice long tail. Put some pressure on the thread, and then when we snip it, it should secure in. So at the moment I've just done the pink, I've not done the grey. So I'm going to go back now and then attach the grey on, and that will then attach that one in. But I'll just go and do the other one, pink one here first. But pretty much just going to do the same, I might just tuck under that edge. Yeah, I think I will. I'll tuck under the raw edge of the felt, so it kind of gives it a little bit of a stand like that. And then that will then attach that ear on, and do the other one the same. Stitch through the back here with a pale grey thread, and then she'll have her ears on, and then we'll be able to put her bonnet on. And I'll turn the camera around when I've done all of that and show you. Okay, so here's Clara with her lovely ears just poking out of her bonnet there. There's the back of her bonnet, all sitting all lovely and proud. It's got a nice weight to it, and it just fits in nicely onto the back of her neck. So there she's looking all nice and neat and tidy. Okay, so that's it then for the bonnet. I hope you've enjoyed sewing along with me today. It has been a bit fiddly and it has been difficult to show you in places, so I hope you've been able to pick up the gist of how to sew this together with the instructions, and then with actually seeing me do it on the screen. Hopefully that's given you enough of an idea for you to be able to sew your bonnet. The next thing that we're going to be doing is the dress, so that's our next project. I'll get started on that. So I hope you've enjoyed stitching along with me today. If you have, then please consider subscribing to my channel. I'd really appreciate it and like to know that you're here. And also, if you have enjoyed watching, then please would you just click on the like button as well, or leave me a comment. I always enjoy interacting with everybody who watches my videos. So have a great day stitching, everybody, and I hope your bonnet comes out as nicely as mine has. Take care, everybody. Bye.